Okay, so get ready because we're going deep on this one, folks. Um, Peter Kürten.
The Vampire of Düsseldorf.
Yeah, the Vampire of Düsseldorf.
Yeah.
It is
It's a wild one.
it's a wild one. You guys sent in a bunch of really interesting stuff. We've got YouTube transcripts from some true crime channels that I know you all love.
The best.
And of
Read some
course,
stuff. The OG.
we always gotta go Wikipedia.
New Wikipedia.
And just a warning, this one is not for the faint of heart.
No.
This is a rough one.
Yeah, trigger warning for sure.
Yeah. But what I think is so interesting about this case is it's not enough to just sort of like lay out the facts of the crimes.
Right.
We want to try to figure out like what.
Why?
Yeah, the why.
The why,
Let's out.
absolutely. And that's what makes this case so compelling to me is that nickname, the vampire, wasn't just sensationalized reporting. It speaks to a very specific and frankly chilling aspect of his crimes that we'll get into later. But to really understand that darkness, you have to go back to the beginning. And Kürten's childhood, honestly, it reads like a textbook case of how early trauma can just completely warp a person's entire trajectory.
It's really rough. I mean, we're not just talking about poverty, although that was certainly a factor.
Mm.
His father was incredibly abusive, and the details of that abuse are really hard to even stomach.
Yeah, this wasn't just physical abuse directed at Peter himself. He was forced to witness his father repeatedly rape his mother and his sisters.
Oh my gosh.
Imagine the impact of that kind of exposure to violence, especially at such a young age. It poisons a child's understanding of intimacy, of power, of sexuality. I mean, everything.
Yeah, it just sets the stage for some really dangerous patterns of behavior.
Right.
And you see those patterns emerging very early on in Kürten's life.
Yeah.
The incident with the dog catcher, for example.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't just passively witnessing animal cruelty.
Mhm.
He was actively participating in it alongside a deeply disturbed adult figure.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Kürten actually linked this violence with sexual gratification. So you see this disturbing connection forming very, very early on between pain, suffering, and pleasure for him. This is absolutely key to understanding the trajectory of his later crimes.
It's like a horrifying preview of what's to come.
Exactly.
And then there's the story of the drowned boys. Now, Kürten himself claimed that he committed his first murders at the age of 9, pushing his schoolmate off a raft and holding another boy underwater.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, whether that story is factual or just some sort of twisted fantasy, it's still incredibly revealing. Even as a child, you see this pattern of violence, this utter lack of empathy. It suggests a deeply rooted disturbance that unfortunately only escalated over time.
Yeah, and escalate it did.
It did.
His early convictions for theft and arson, even then there was a cruelty that went beyond just material gain.
Right.
He specifically targeted homeless people with the arson, and by his own admission, derived sexual pleasure from it.
Again, that thread of cruelty, the need to inflict pain and suffering for his own gratification. It's all there even before he graduates to murder.
Wow.
Which brings us to 1913 and the murder of Christine Klein.
Yeah.
This is the case that truly marks the beginning of his horrific career.
10-year-old Christine Klein strangled her throat slashed. But what's even more disturbing is that Kürten admitted to returning to her grave repeatedly for sexual gratification.
This points to necrophilia, an obsession with corpses as objects of sexual desire. And it's a theme that becomes more and more pronounced as Kürten's crimes escalate in both frequency and brutality.
And it's right around this time that Kürten gets his hands on a skeleton key. I mean, just think about the implications of that for a moment.
Oh, it's absolutely chilling. A skeleton key meant that he had access to potentially any home in Düsseldorf.
Oh, gosh.
Imagine the terror that must have gripped the city knowing that this predator could be lurking anywhere unseen and able to enter your home at will.
And on top of that terror, you've got the attempted murder of Gertrude Franken that same year.
Huh?
Thankfully, she survived the attack, but it's a stark reminder that Kürten's urges were becoming more and more uncontrollable.
It was only a matter of time before things took an even darker turn.
Yeah.
And that turn comes when Kürten finds himself imprisoned. Now, prison is rarely a rehabilitative experience for anyone. But for someone like Kürten, already predisposed to violence, simmering with rage, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire.
Yeah, the brutal treatment from the guards,
Yeah.
the isolation, it all seemed to intensify his hatred for society and fuel those fantasies of revenge. It's almost as if the very system designed to punish him only served to make him worse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's within this context of rage and resentment that we see one of the most fascinating and disturbing chapters of Kürten's life unfold.
Yeah.
His marriage to Auguste de Scharf. What's truly remarkable is that Auguste herself was a convicted murderer.
Wow. It makes you wonder what draws two people with such violent histories together.
Right?
Was it a shared understanding of darkness? Some sort of twisted kinship?
It's a question worth pondering. Their relationship is incredibly complex and shrouded in darkness, just like so much of Kürten's life. But what we do know is that it wasn't a healthy pairing by any stretch of the imagination. The cycle of abuse continued, marked by affairs, more arson, and a constant undercurrent of violence.
And sadly, as we'll see, this was just the calm before the storm.
Ah.
The darkest chapter of Kürten's story, the one that truly earned him the nickname Vampire of Düsseldorf, was still to come.
So 1929, this is where things really take a dark turn. I mean, the frequency and the sheer brutality of Kürten's attacks just escalate dramatically. And what's really chilling is the variety of methods he uses.
Yeah, like hammers, scissors, knives, stabbing, strangulation. It's almost as if he's experimenting, pushing the boundaries of his own depravity.
Yeah, and from an investigative standpoint, this lack of a consistent signature must have made him incredibly difficult to catch.
For sure. Each attack seems so different, fueled by these seemingly random impulses.
Yeah, but even within this chaotic spree, there are certain cases that stand out for their sheer horror. The double murder of the two foster sisters at the fair, for example.
Oh, God, that one is just bone-chilling. The way he manipulates the older sister into separating from the younger one, the sheer brutality of the attacks. And then he returns to the scene afterward, seemingly to revel in the fear and chaos he's created.
It's a classic example of a narcissist feeding off the terror he's inflicted. And then there's the Gertrude Alberman case.
5 years old.
Brutally stabbed to death.
34 stab wounds.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to fathom that level of rage and cruelty directed at a child.
And you know, we have to try to understand this within the framework of Kürten's psychology.
Right.
Remember that early connection he formed between violence and sexual gratification?
Right.
This wasn't just about killing for him. It was about prolonging the act, maximizing the suffering, and through that suffering, achieving his own twisted form of sexual release.
And this brings us to the element that I think really earned Kürten that nickname, the Vampire of Düsseldorf, the blood drinking.
Right.
Now, it's important to note that this wasn't present in all of the attacks, which makes it even more perplexing.
Yeah.
So why did he do it? What was the motivation behind this very specific act?
It's a question that continues to fascinate and horrify people. And I think the answer likely lies in a complex interplay of psychological factors. You know, on a very primal level, consuming the blood of your victim is a way to assert ultimate dominance, to literally take something from them, to possess a part of them.
Till I get flat.
There's also a deeply perverse element of intimacy at play here, a blurring of the boundaries between self and other.
It's like some kind of twisted communion.
Exactly. And for Kürten, a man so profoundly isolated and alienated from humanity, this act might have provided a temporary, albeit horrifically warped sense of connection. It's a glimpse into the darkest recesses of human psychology, and it's something that continues to both fascinate and repel us even today.
So eventually, thankfully, Kürten is caught. And it's almost ironic the circumstances of his capture. He ends up being apprehended after intervening to save a woman from being harassed. He does this seemingly good deed, and it inadvertently leads to his downfall.
It speaks to the contradictions inherent in his personality. You know, he's capable of both shocking cruelty and moments of almost disarming kindness.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that evil rarely presents itself in a purely monstrous form. It often lurks beneath a veneer of normalcy, even charm.
Right.
Which makes it all the more dangerous.
And then there's the betrayal by his own wife, Auguste. Was she motivated by the reward money, or was this her way of finally breaking free from his control? It's hard to say for sure.
Their relationship is one of the most intriguing aspects of this whole case. I mean, was it a genuine connection, however twisted and unhealthy? Or was it just a partnership of convenience built on shared darkness and a mutual need for control? You know, it's something that I think you as the listener will have to ponder for yourself.
Once in custody, Kürten's confession is chillingly detailed. He boasts about his crimes, recounting them with his disturbing level of detail and an almost complete lack of remorse.
And the confession provides a window into his psyche. It's here that the work of Carl Berg, the psychiatrist who examined Kürten, becomes crucial. Berg's analysis revealed this complex web of psychological factors at play. Sadism, a deep-seated desire for revenge against society, and this chilling awareness of his actions.
Yeah, but what's particularly unsettling is that despite this awareness, Kürten seemed able to compartmentalize to appear normal when it suited him.
Yeah.
That's what makes him so terrifyingly relatable in a way. He challenges our assumptions about what a monster looks like.
Yeah.
He forces us to confront the fact that evil can exist even in the most mundane and unexpected of forms.
Absolutely. And of course, as news of these crimes spread, the trial and eventual execution become a media sensation. The vampire nickname takes hold further, cementing his place in the public imagination as this figure of both horror and fascination.
And it speaks to our enduring fascination with true crime, right?
Okay.
And how those stories often reflect these societal anxieties and this deep-seated need to understand the darkness that exists within humanity. Figures like Kürten, as horrifying as they provide a focal point for those feelings, a way to explore the extremes of human behavior and confront the uncomfortable reality that the line between good and evil is often far more blurred than we'd like to believe.
That's such a crucial point. We're drawn to these stories because they force us to confront our own vulnerabilities, our own capacity for darkness. They remind us that monsters aren't always lurking in the shadows. They can sometimes be hiding in plain sight.
And even in his final moments, Kürten's words are horrifyingly revealing. Right up until his execution, he maintains that chilling fixation on blood and pleasure.
It's a haunting reminder that for some individuals, the desire for gratification, however twisted and depraved, can supersede even the basic instinct for self-preservation.
And then, after his execution, there's that unsettling decision to put his head on display. Talk about morbid curiosity.
I know, right?
Was there any scientific value to that act? Or was it purely a gruesome spectacle intended to satisfy the public's need for retribution even after death?
It's a question that raises some complex ethical concerns about the treatment of the dead, particularly in the context of criminal justice.
Yeah.
Does displaying the head of a criminal like Kürten serve any legitimate purpose? Or is it simply this macabre act of dehumanization that further perpetuates that cycle of violence and vengeance?
It's a question that lingers long after the details of the case fade from memory. And that's what makes this deep dive so much more than just a sensationalized true crime story.
Yeah.
It's a descent into like the darkest corners of the human psyche, right?
Absolutely.
And it forces us to confront all these uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil, the impact of trauma,
Right.
and that complex interplay of like nature versus nurture.
Precisely. And I think one of the most enduring questions this case raises is, was Peter Kürten born a monster? Or did his horrific upbringing, that relentless exposure to violence and abuse, create the monster?
It's like the ultimate question, right?
Right.
I mean, on the one hand, his childhood was an absolute nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's hard to imagine anyone emerging from that kind of environment unscathed.
Right.
It almost seems inevitable that he would be warped by those experiences.
But then again, countless individuals experience trauma and they don't become serial killers.
Right.
So where's that tipping point? What makes one person susceptible to that kind of darkness, while another, facing similar horrors, finds a way to navigate a path towards healing and normalcy?
It's a question that continues to plague criminologists, psychologists, sociologists,
Absolutely.
to this day.
Yeah.
And it brings up another question, which is how much responsibility does society bear for the criminals it produces? Is it solely a matter of like individual choice?
Yeah.
Or are there these like larger systemic forces at play that contribute to these horrific outcomes?
It's a conversation that needs to be had, and I think your deep dive into the Kürten case is a perfect example of why these stories matter. They're not just about morbid curiosity. They're about trying to understand the roots of violence, the complexities of human behavior, and ultimately how we can create a world where tragedies like this are less likely to occur.
It's given me a lot to think about.
Mm.
And I'm already like, I feel that urge to delve a little deeper into some of the topics we touched on today, like Carl Berg's work on sadism, for example,
Yeah.
or the early history of forensic psychology. There are so many like fascinating threads to pull on here.
That's the beauty of a deep dive like this. It sparks curiosity, it challenges assumptions, and it ultimately encourages us to continue exploring. And to our listener, I would say this: don't let this be the end of your journey. Read those sources, do your own research, and come to your own conclusions about what made Peter Kürten tick.
Yeah, because as we've seen today, even in the face of something as horrifying as this, there's always more to learn. Understanding the why behind the monster can help us grapple with the how and hopefully in some small way prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening in the future.
Well said. And on that note, I think we'll leave you with one final thought-provoking question to ponder. If Kürten was at least in part a product of his environment, what does that say about the potential for darkness that exists within us all? It's a chilling thought, but one worth contemplating as you continue to explore this fascinating and deeply disturbing case.
Until next time, keep diving.